Hello, my name is Elizabeth Gadd. I work at Loughborough University in the UK, and I'm also the chair of the International Network of Research Management Societies, INORMS Research Evaluation Group, and one of the vice chairs of the Coalition on Advancing Research Assessment, COARA. This is an ex-post recording of a keynote I gave to the European University Association Annual Conference on the 20th of April 2023 about this important question as to whether rankings can support universities' quest for excellence. Preceding my talk, two 5-minute pre-recorded videos were played, one from Gero Federkyle describing U Multirank, an EU-funded ranking that assesses a wider range of university activities than most rankings, and one from Phil Beattie regarding the Times Higher Impact ranking, in which he states how proud he is that their ranking redefines excellence in higher education and encourages universities to do better. University rankings have been around for over a century, but it's really only been since the 1980s that we've seen a significant rise in both the volume and the range of national and international university rankings, with three rising to particular dominance in Europe: the QS, the Times Higher Education World University Rankings, and the Shanghai Academic Ranking of World Universities. So whilst it's interesting to hear from developments like the Times Higher Impact Rankings and U Multirank, whilst this triopoly exists, the influence of other players is negligible. But so what? Aren't these just harmless curiosities, something to browse at the breakfast table? Unfortunately not. University rankings have a significant impact on all actors in the HE sector. We can see this in the behaviour of governments all over the world that have invested in so-called excellence initiatives that seek not primarily to improve the quality of their education or to push back the boundaries of knowledge, but to increase their chances of getting a number of universities into the upper echelons of the university rankings. Some countries have merged a number of smaller institutions to create larger universities with a view to having a bigger impact on the university rankings. So Paris-Saclay is one example, and the universities in Western Australia are now reported to be thinking about doing the same thing. In the UK, the government are using the rankings to decide who has unfettered access to our closely guarded shores by developing a new visa for so-called high potential individuals, which are identified solely by virtue of having attended a university which appears in the top 50 of at least two of the big three university rankings. And I'll show you the impact of that in a moment. Not surprisingly, students then seek to study in these highly ranked institutions, which has led to many universities' financial stability being deeply affected by their rank, as this study showed last year. Consequently, institutions the world over are investing resources and appointing staff to enable them to do better in the rankings. But unfortunately, the stakes are so high that efforts don't stop at legitimate activity, but at best gaming the system, such as encouraging positive responses to reputation surveys, and at worst cheating, such as paying highly cited scholars from other universities to add your institution as a secondary affiliation, thus boosting their citation rates. So we can see that the rankings exert a trickle-down effect on government behaviour, funder behaviour, university behaviour, and of course ultimately on the behaviour of individual students and researchers, both as their value is wrongly judged by the institutions they studied and worked at, but also by the pressures placed on them by institutions that encourage them to engage in ranking climbing rather than genuinely scholarly activities. And it's for this reason that the Coalition on Advancing Research Assessment, to which the European University Association is signatory of course, has as one of its 4 core commitments avoiding the use of rankings of research organisations in research and researcher assessment. But you might be thinking, surely universities should be accountable, right? We can't expect to avoid scrutiny, especially when we may be spending taxpayer money and at a time when trust in scholarship is at an all-time low. Well, yes, of course. I don't know of any university that's unwilling to be held to account, nor that fails to engage in a significant volume of internal and external monitoring activity. The question we need to address, I think, is whether university rankings are the ones to whom we should be accountable. In his video, Phil Beattie concluded that Times Higher Education has redefined excellence in higher education. We need to ask whether redefining excellence in higher education is the role of unappointed third parties that are themselves unaccountable. Indeed, as Professor Stephen Curry, chair of the Declaration on Research Assessment, DORA, succinctly put it on Twitter recently, if you need a league table to tell you what matters, are you really a university? And if we're using this data to support our own decision making, perhaps we should be doing some due diligence of our own and ask 3 questions of the rankings, namely, are they true, are they fair, and are they helpful? So let's kick off with our first question. Are they true? Universities are truth seekers after all and hold ourselves to the highest standards of rigour in our own research, so we wouldn't want to lend legitimacy to something that was patently untrue. So let's tackle this like a research proposal and firstly take a look at the research question posed by the rankings, namely, which is the best university in the world? And of course, this is a badly formed research question. Best at what? Assuming you did get it past your supervisor, you'd still then need some agreement as to what a top university looks like. And you'd soon realise there is no one definition, because universities are not a homogeneous group. They are hugely varied and complex entities. Even those activities which are common to most universities, such as teaching, research and knowledge transfer, are not always covered by the main university rankings. A notable example here, of course, is the fact that despite the Times Higher's investment in their impact rankings, impact plays no role at all in their flagship product, the World University Rankings. Where rankings do address some of these characteristics, no two agree on how they should be weighted to define the best university. Assuming we let this past, as good researchers we should at least expect the indicators used to have some face validity for the concepts being measured. But alas, that's not really what we have. So here are the indicators used by the Academic Ranking of World Universities, where they seek to measure education quality and staff quality by the number of alumni or staff winning Nobel Prizes or Fields Medals. And of course, the idea that the only research output that counts is published in Nature and Science is risible. We also know that in research assessment, indicators should be sensitive to the intrinsic inertia of the object being measured. And given that universities are large, slow-moving organisations, we shouldn't see significant rises in their rank in a single year. But of course we do, as Jelena Brankovic recently pointed out in this blog post, where she describes a 120 place rise for Bielefeld University over 2 years due to one scholar contributing to the global burden of disease study, leading to hyper-authored, highly cited papers published in The Lancet. And of course the data on which the rankings relies is also questionable, not least because much of it is supplied by universities and is unverifiable, unless of course a whistleblower calls it out, as was the case of the University of Columbia recently, where their ranking plummeted after Professor Michael Thaddeus exposed much of their data for being false. And of course the surveys used by many rankings are deeply problematic and described by former president of Reed College in the US as unscientific straw polls. But of course, as scholars, we know that no study is perfect and that it's our duty to report the limitations and uncertainty inherent in our findings. And to be fair, the CWTS Leiden ranking does publish stability intervals alongside some of their data. But no other ranking does this, and certainly not the big three. And some work done by Adrian Barnett at QUT highlighted how the application of a 10% error in citation counts renders the rankings meaningless, with the median overlap per university being 76 places, and that's before the error associated with other indicators is added in. So do the rankings pass our first test? Are they true? Are they accurate, robust and honest? Do they tell us whether one university is better than another university? Categorically not. And of course, if they're not true, then they're almost certainly not fair, because they are not rewarding the right institutions. But there are other darker sides to this inequity. So various studies have concluded that the winners in global university rankings are always the old, large, wealthy, research-intensive, science-focused, English-speaking universities in the global north. And of course, no matter how many excellence initiatives you fund, you can't change your age or your geography. One of the things that exacerbates this is the heavy use of bibliometric data by the rankings, which are so biased towards the global north. So this data shows that 81% of Scopus journals used by the QS and Times Higher are based in the global north. So not surprisingly, when we look at the location of the top 20 universities ranked in the flagship Times Higher World University Rankings, 100% are in the global north. However, despite their ambition to redefine excellence in higher education with their impact rankings, when you look at the location of the top 20 institutions of the impact ranking, also 100% in the global north. And of course, the knock-on effect here, when this data is used by policymakers, is that real people are affected. So the use of rankings by the UK government would suggest that there's not a single high potential individual to be found across the whole of Africa or Latin America, or even parts of Europe for that matter, perpetuating existing inequalities. For this reason, the United Nations University International Institute for Global Health have recently published a briefing paper exposing the rankings as a mechanism by which the concentration of power and prestige amongst universities in the global north is maintained, which is having an inappropriate influence on global health priorities. But it's not just global inequities that the rankings exacerbate. At the beginning of this year, Yale, Harvard and others surprised everyone by pulling out of the US News Law rankings. And then another glut pulled out of the US News Medical School rankings, citing, amongst other things, concerns about how the ranking incentivises schools to direct financial aid towards wealthy applicants with high test scores instead of those with actual financial need. And of course, another dimension of fairness is not only whether certain groups are systematically excluded, but whether some are getting more help than others to succeed. Because rankings don't only rank institutions, but offer consultancy, data and other service to help them become more highly ranked. And in 2021, Igor Chirikov showed that universities that had such contracts with the QS rankings ultimately ended up doing better in the rankings overall, despite no other outward signs of changes to institutional quality. We see the same conflict of interests at play in the existence of the World 100 Reputation Network. This is an exclusive club open only to those already in the top 100, willing to pay the annual €8,000 fee, and run by a company suspiciously co-located with the Times Higher, whose sole purpose it is to maintain their position in the rankings and keep everyone else out. As tireless rankings researcher Jelena Brankovic recently commented on Twitter, imagine a game of football in which the referee is also the coach of one of the teams playing. Crazy, right? You know what's crazier? The audience believing that a fair game is possible. So if the rankings are neither true nor fair, the question remains as to whether rankings can really be helpful. Now, the obvious target for the rankings is students and their parents, but the irony here, of course, is that university rankings often don't assess teaching quality at all, or if they do, they use very poor indicators, such as staff-student ratios, as a proxy. The truth is that students, like many others, look for answers in the rankings, not because the answers are there, but because this is where the only data is. This is called the streetlight effect. We lose our wallet in the park, but look for it under the streetlight because there's no point looking in the dark. But of course, students are finding something in that streetlight. It's just not what we think they should be looking for. Because the painful truth is that students don't really care if a university is any good. They care whether other people think the university is any good, because ultimately that is how they will be judged. They are seeking status. As Colin Diver says, post-secondary education has become a competition for prestige, and rankings have become the primary signifiers. In this way, rankings are to universities what journal impact factors are to journals and H indices are to faculty, false signifiers of prestige, of merit, but which, with constant use, ultimately can become self-fulfilling prophecies. And whilst we can expose these indicators, they aren't the enemy. It's the underlying hierarchical, hyper-competitive prestige economy that's our problem. Because rankings don't encourage us to innocently do better, as Phil Beatty suggested, but to be the best. To sharpen our elbows, tuck our cloaks into our belts, and to push everyone else off the ladder until we are at the top. And we have to ask if that's the HE sector that we need. Are rankings encouraging the diversity of organisations required to meet the many and varied needs of society? Or are they leading to greater homogeneity amongst institutions as everyone seeks to become Princeton or Cambridge? Are they inspiring winners, as my own university strapline reads, or are they making losers out of everyone? Are they encouraging the collaborations that we need to solve the world's grand challenges, or are they making competitors out of us all? Perhaps the better question here is, who stands most to benefit from the existence of university rankings? And here the answer is clear. The winners at university rankings are the rankers, and perhaps the highly ranked. In fact, the very two groups we see symbiotically intertwined in the exclusive tryst that is the World 100 Reputation Network. So what do we do about all this? If tackling the rankings means tackling the prestige economy that the rankings embeds, how might we achieve that? Well, I think the first step is to redefine prestige, which of course is what the impact rankings and U multi-rank are trying to do. But unfortunately, dabbling with better measures can only have so much effect whilst the dominant legacy measures are still in place. And secondly, we need to educate the world that excellence cannot be counted, which of course the impact rankings and others are still trying to do. We need much broader, more diverse and inclusive ways of recognising quality. So how might universities respond to all this? Whilst I've argued that accepting the rankings as they are is an unacceptable position for the intellectually credible university, I recognise that given the prestige economy in which we operate, to boycott the rankings would for most be tantamount to financial and reputational suicide. So I'd like to leave you with 4 practical suggestions that we can all support that will help effect a shift towards better and fairer university assessment. The first is simply to sign the agreement on advancing research assessment, if we haven't already, and thereby commit not to using rankings in research or researcher assessment, so signalling in a small way our concern about the perverse effects of the rankings. The second suggestion is to sign up to More Than Our Rank. This is a relatively new initiative introduced by the iNorms Research Evaluation Group and supported by the EUA and many others, which seeks both to redefine prestige and to educate that excellence cannot be counted by providing universities with an opportunity to describe in a qualitative way how much more they have to offer the world than is currently captured by the global university rankings. A narrative CV for universities, if you will. It's early days, but it has signatories from amongst the top 100 and the yet to place, and offers a no-risk way to silently expose the rankings' narrow definitions of excellence. Because whether you love or hate the rankings, we can all agree that we are so much more than our rank. The third thing we can all do is to actively participate in efforts to generate better forms of university assessment. Obviously, the COARA call for working groups might provide an opportunity here. However we do it, I think a key feature of any improved assessment system, especially one that seeks to debunk the prestige myth, will be a move towards university profiles rather than university rankings. Decision makers need meaningful data, not spurious league tables. And it does feel to me as though U Multirank is really heading in the right direction here, and is only held back, I think, by lack of participation by a critical mass of institutions and by being significantly less well resourced than their commercial counterparts. The final thing we might reasonably demand as consumers of the rankings is better accountability from the rankers themselves. Indeed, in 2020, iNorms developed some ranker ratings which attempted to do just this, highlighting how the rankings fell short of community-agreed best practice. Unfortunately, this largely fell on deaf ears, but I think that given the impact of the rankings, it wouldn't be inappropriate for them to be subject to some independent scrutiny, and for the community to insist that greater transparency, honesty and rigour are applied to the data used to judge them. And I think the EUA is in an excellent position to oversee some form of collective action in this space. My time is up. Thank you very much for listening.